This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote idea to the meaning of the word?
What's up?
Hey. We are without Andrew this week, so it's just you and me like old times.
Just like old times. No one here forcing their crappy Hamel views on us.
Yep, we get it free and clear, ERB all the way.
We should make the title of this episode a 50-minute love letter to ERB. But like, we should not talk about ERB the rest of this episode.
Yeah. Yeah, because Andrew, I know, does listen to the podcast. And so that will be a hilarious one for him to come across. I just kind of want to dive into something because you have had this on your to-do to talk about for a month now on the podcast, which is modeling friendships in your database models. And
yeah, I would have thought modeling friendships in programming is way easier than it is. That seems like a solved problem by like Facebook and MySpace for the last 15 years now. And the Twitter one, like the concept of following people like on Twitter, that's a way easier one, right? Because you're not like friendship. Like it's not like one person has to accept the other requests. It's just like fire off a database record. This person is following this person.
And it's interesting too, because with Twitter, you have to agree to be friends. No, on Facebook you do. And yet Facebook has a way to follow people without them being friends. So they really have the required approval and the Twitter style following, which is like an extra level of complexity. And yeah, there's a lot to it. And it seems like a lot of the sites do it all a little bit differently too.
Yeah. So my use case is that with HopeGrid, which is one of my side projects where basically like we have churches, or churches, the majority of the people that like sign up. Essentially what happens is they have people come to them and ask them for help. And so that could be like, I need money. I need help paying my bills. I guess the same thing as money. I need a place to stay, stuff like that. And so churches like not only record that information, but what like HopeGrid is a way to help other churches know how you've helped someone, because like it's pretty common that it's not like everyone does this, but it is common that you have some people that take advantage of that kind of help. And so they go to like church A, I need $50, get it, go like a few streets over, or I mean, this is the South. So go one street number over and to another church and be like, hey, I need the same thing. And so what our like system is, it's designed to try and help stop some of that stuff because, you know, if you're always helping people who don't need help, then you can't help the people that do need help eventually.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but we've always struggled because we are storing information that we just don't want to give out to anyone who signs up for our platform, right?
Sure.
So what we're working on now is this idea of partnerships where Church A says, hey, I'm going to sign this form, this digital form, and take responsibility for sharing this information with this other church. That's basically, I want to be friends with someone on the internet. And so I was like, how do I do this? I felt like I was learning how to program. I was like Googling the most like basic stuff. What does a database schema for this look like?
Yeah.
And like one of the more common answers I saw, well, first, nobody agrees on this because like you said, like everybody does a little different. But one of the more common things I saw was, well, just create 2 database records. The first record is basically the person requesting the friendship. And in that same row, there's a requestee, right? Like a recipient of that request. And then what you do is you duplicate that record with the inverse. And so you've got basically one record is like, hey, I sent this person a request, duplicates it and says, the relationship is reversed. What do you want to do with this? And so if they accept it, then both of the records become accepted. If not, then you can use it for blocking, right? Because you can be like, this person does not want to be friends with them.
Right. And then do you use those records is your join table. When you say, has many friends, you look for the ones where it's accepted.
Yes.
Okay.
I was like, that seems way too complicated.
Yeah, right.
I'm a Rails dev, okay? Like,
Gem installs Acts as my friend.
Okay, so at first I was trying to avoid that.
It seems like one of those features, right, that's simple enough that you should be able to scaffold up in 5 minutes and not need a library to help you with that.
Exactly. So then I said, you know what? I got this. Didn't get it. Couldn't figure it out. Because what I kept running into was I was just trying to do it with one record.
Yeah, right. Because you would imagine you have a join table and it's like a pending thing and it's like the two users. But then you have to keep track of who initiated it and the response all on the same record. And that gets a little bit more complex that way.
It makes it stupid hard to query that kind of data, especially if you want to just use Rails relationships. It's not that simple because you're both referring to the same class. Let's just say user. In my case, it's organization. You're referring to the same class. So you're saying like a user has many friends where it's been accepted. They have many requested friendships, not that they requested, but that someone else requested of them. You do have the ones that are the ones they requested. And I was like, I probably spent like 2 or 3 nights, a couple hours a night, just like shredding through code. Get reset hard. This is trash.
Yeah, it's tricky. And it reminds me a lot about if you're building teams and you want to invite people, you might be inviting someone with an email address who's already in the system, but you also might be inviting somebody who doesn't have an account. So then you got to store like an association half the time and maybe not the other half if they don't have accounts. And you also have to, in the case that they do have an account, right? You still usually, almost all the time, want them to be able to approve the invite because otherwise you can do stuff that's kind of spammy where you can invite people to your team and it just auto accepts. And that would be bad. People would do that maliciously and add DHH to your Rails project or whatever. Like you don't want that going on. It's really that same problem of you need like a temporary relationship waiting for approval. And then you need a permanent thing that are two separate things. And I guess if you have a single join table, right, you've got one who's the requester and one who's the recipient. But also if they accept that and you leave it as just that record, the one person has to query for all those where they're the recipient, and the other person has to query for those where they're the sender. And that gets, now you've got to query the same table against 2 different columns, and that's not great.
Yeah. Or you want to know who just all your friends are straight up. And you've got to query the table, but do inverse logic. And I was like, okay, how does a library do it? So I think I went with HasFriendship library. Let me check for show notes.
First question before you do that. Did you watch, which is what I would do, because I don't know if I have a screencast on friendships, but did you
where this is
look
going.
at Railscasts?
I watched the Railscast.
That would be my default. What would Ryan Bates do? If I haven't done it before or recently, I'm like, this is definitely something Ryan Bates has done.
Yeah. WRBD. Yeah. So that episode is Self-Referential Association. I did watch that and I almost tweeted about it because I had all the feels. Okay. So basically Ryan's episode was generate 2 records.
It's more like the following style, right?
Let's see here. No, that is right. It's this inverse relationship. So I can query for friendships. I can query like people I've requested, and I can query for people who've requested me. But there's not necessarily any way to get that entire list.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it kind of falls apart for me because it leaves me in a spot where I need to do a lot of querying because I only want to show information where people are partnered. And I don't really want to have to say, where they're friends or they're inverse friends.
Yeah.
Because the way I do it is I make a scope that you can view this if your organization is either the one that added this or you're in this list. So I don't want to be like, you added it or you're a friend or you're an inverse friend. Mm-hmm. So I thought, how does this library do it? It's called HasFriendship. And it does basically what everybody online suggested, which is have 2 rows, but it handles the like callbacks and stuff to do that.
Oh, okay.
I was like in a bit of denial here because I was like, I still don't believe this is the best way. So I didn't use this. Plus, the other thing is this is all about friends. All the methods to remove friend requests.
Yeah.
And I'm not working with that here. Like I have a name partnership and I'm kind of OCD. So I was like, well, I'm just going to do this myself. And so I spent a night trying to do it. And eventually I was like, you know what? Jim install HasFriendship. And I made a partnerable module, a mix-in concern, whatever you want to call it. And I just aliased all the methods instead of being friend to just be like partner. So remove friend is like in partnership. Friend request is
that's smart. I like that a lot because I talked about alias in the advanced Ruby course. And somebody asked like, why would I want to alias stuff ever really? And I was like, well, like you might have a subscription and use the word canceled, but do you spell it with 1 L or 2 L's? And you can just alias it and you can handle both. But this is a really good idea and a good example of using aliases to take the same conceptual thing, but apply it to friendships or partnerships or whatever else that you need. Because otherwise you have this, I don't know what you would call it. You would have to dynamically define all those methods. If you made it generic and said like acts as, I don't know, something generic and then give it a method name like friendship or partnership and allow that to be configurable, you'd have to do a lot of meta programming. But this is a really elegant way of using the wording that you want, which you'll understand because it will be weird context switch to go to friendships to think about in your code. When on the UI, all you want to show is partnership this and that. So I really like that solution. That's really nice.
I just slacked you a screenshot of that model. So yeah, I just redefined the has minis. So it was like has many partnerships. Yeah. I did alias attribute to override the method names. And then I just defined some custom methods that I wanted to know. Like I wanted to ask, is this organization partnered with another one? So then I just still used all my alias methods stuff. But yeah, this felt like the good solution. Yeah. Not the best one, but it was best of both worlds. I didn't reinvent the wheel for modeling friendships. And I still got to use my domain specific language, my terminology.
Right. Which I think is really valuable to do. You know, like there was one app that I was working on a long time ago and I was experimenting. We have the user model, but we have teachers and students. And what if we name them teacher and student throughout our code instead of current user or whatever? And it's amazing how much that makes your clarity in your code when you're current teacher, current student versus like current user is a student ? Everywhere. It's way easier to reason. So that's a really good example, I think, of a use case where like naming your code in the domain is just wonderful. It saves a lot of trouble because if you're dealing with friendships on the back end, you're going to get confused eventually.
Yeah, I'm happy with it. And I finally like got over that hurdle because it's like that balance of, you know, you don't want to accrue a lot of technical debt. But at the same time, this is a startup. I don't make money off this. Yeah, while I want it to be perfect, I also just want to get it done.
Yep. Yeah, that's probably what I would have done too. You know, either look at the gem and look for inspiration there and realize, yeah, it's not as simple as you imagine a friendship feature to be or whatever. The way that we solved it in Jumpstart Pro is a little different, but very similar. the thing that I don't like about ours is, so we have two separate models. So we have an account invitation and account user. So the account users are ones who have accepted the invitation. So the process goes like this, where I create my account and I invite someone, which creates an account invite. That sends an email and has the token on it. And then the user clicks on the email. We look up the invitation and you can accept or deny. If you deny, you delete the account invitation. And if you accept, we create an account user based on the data in the account invitation. So if you add extra data like roles or something, you can define it on the account invitation and then we copy it over to the account user, which is permanent. And then we delete the account invitation afterwards in both cases because we don't need it. And the only downside of that is duplicating those roles. Like we got to move them from one model to another. And that didn't seem ideal, but it was kind of the same process. And I'm pretty happy with that. The only annoyance is that you have to make your invitation store this data temporarily and move it over. So you have to kind of duplicate that. If you add fields to account user or something, you also need to make sure you don't forget to add it to the invitation. But yeah, I ended up just treating it as kind of two separate models that way. But I don't really need that same query that you do. I have account users and I just have a table with all of them, but users are not actually asking for who's following or whatever.
You more just want to see, are you a part of this team?
Yeah. And so like, I guess you can query that table if you were doing friendships, but then you have people who's like, you have the two IDs and you could be on either side of that relationship in a friendship. And I don't really need that in my case. So that's the tricky part that makes your, friendships can't really work that same way to make it easy to query all of your friends and vice versa. It's so funny because it seems like every website has it and that you would find one solution that everyone uses. And no, of course not. It's not that simple. It's programming.
I'll be honest though, I've been working on that Twitter clone for the Stimulus Reflex course. And now that I'm at that point where it's like following people, I'm like, well, this is hella easy.
Yeah, we just install this and we're done.
Well, yeah, I don't even need that. It's just like, just follow someone. Just create that record.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, we don't need the acceptance or whatever. And when you don't need, that makes it amazingly simple.
That's where the complexity comes in, is actually, it's like you're entering into a bond together. And so you need both people to want to be a part of that bond.
Yeah, it's so funny. It seems trivial, and yet to model it correctly and in a way that's going to be efficient to query later on is harder. That's pretty funny. There's a lot of things like that. There's a very lot of things that are hard to model out that way. It's interesting.
One thing you wanted to talk about today, which we can segue back into, speaking of Railscast.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, you don't see Ryan Bates tweet very much anymore, but the last tweets he made recently, I was like, oh, it's Ryan Bates. And I was like, cool. And then I read his tweet and it's, I don't recommend DigitalOcean anymore. And I was like, wait a minute, what happened? Because I use DigitalOcean a lot. And I guess he had, as the company's grown, and I think they've changed CEOs, but he was being sponsored or whatever by Linode for a long time and then moved to DigitalOcean. And he had a sponsorship from them to take care of his, hosting costs and everything, which is awesome. But I guess at some point, something changed internally and they decided that they weren't sure if they were going to continue his sponsorship without really telling him and not really getting back to him when he was trying to figure out what is happening. And then they started to send him bills for stuff that were supposed to be covered under his sponsorship and sounded like an ordeal. So I believe he moved back to Linode and DigitalOcean, I think, made it right-ish, but it was a bit too late for them to fix. So sounds like he's back on Linode for hosting and all that. But yeah, that sounded kind of painful. And it was something like, I don't remember, $400 or $800 or something. It was
for a site that doesn't make money anymore. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. And it just didn't seem like they were very supportive of it. And it was like a sponsorship that one of the co-founders or something set up. And then they just like yank this kind of at random. And so you would think that one of the old co-founders having set up a sponsorship would hold some clout when they see that come across, but I don't know. Well, whatever, they fumbled the ball there pretty hard. But luckily, Railscast is still around.
Yeah, some of my favorite stuff was just reading through those tweets of like people responding, because I don't follow Ryan Bates on Twitter only because last time he tweeted was like 2017, right? There's only one time I stuck around following somebody waiting for them to come back, and they did. It was a band. They came back 3 years later. I was like, this is because of me. So when I saw like a Hacker News thread about Ryan Bates, I was like, what? And so I was reading through the tweets, and some people were right. They were like, this doesn't like look good for you, DigitalOcean.
Yeah.
Ryan Bates may be inactive, air quotes, but like he is still a very like beloved figure in the community.
Right. What he says has weight, you know?
Right. Even though he hasn't put anything out like content wise in years, I bet there's still people joining today who know what Railscast is.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think everybody who looks up Rails Screencast will still watch, you know, Railscast. Because while the syntax or some things may have changed, the concepts are still there and still is just as valuable, you know. That ActiveRecord queries may be a little bit different, but concepts of how you organize your models, your friendships are still the same, you know? Yeah, that was a strange one, but I don't know. As long as nothing happens where like all the old Railscast videos get deleted or something, that would be horrendous. I'm sure he has some backups for those, but yeah, it was kind of a strange thing because they took down his site, I believe, randomly. And he was like, what the heck? So yeah, sounds like at least he's got it figured out or whatever, but Railscast will still exist.
I did want to say something that I don't know that you would brag about, but I'll brag for you. I thought it was cool that you reached out to him over Twitter and offered to sponsor like keeping Railscast alive. I thought that was I know you would do that anyway because you're a good dude, but I thought that was like a classy move as someone who like picked up the torch when he dropped off.
Yeah. Well, honestly, like from my perspective, I learned everything from him. There were countless times when he was active, I was learning Rails and had my first job, and there was stuff that was like, hey, we need you to go integrate Facebook login. And I would open Railscast, and like a couple days before he would have posted, you know, Facebook login video. And I'd be like, this is the best thing in the world. I can't believe his timing is so good. So I can't say enough good things about Ryan and Railscast and stuff. It was just like critical to my learning in Rails, and I'm forever grateful for that. So yeah, anything I can do would be more than happy to do anything to help out. And, you know, that's where GoRails kind of started because I was like, man, I miss Railscasts, and he hasn't done it for a year and a half. And maybe I'll try and do my own version of it. I'll never explain things the way he does. And that's the thing about teaching, you know, everybody learns differently from different people. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll give it a shot. And I tried doing courses, but no one really likes to buy courses if they don't know who you are. So I was like, well, I guess maybe I'll try and do weekly screencasts because I can give them away for free like Ryan did. And people missed it. I'll tell you what, that was the reason GoRails exists, I think, is because people like me and you and everybody else really missed Railscasts. So I'm glad to be able to help out and, you know, educate. But I would still love if he came back and did some videos. That would be awesome.
Totally.
So Speaking of reviving old projects and stuff, the Acts As Tenant gem hasn't really gotten any updates for like a year. So I have been using that in Jumpstart Pro because if you have ever done multi-tenancy, a lot of people have used Department. It was probably like the most famous multi-tenant gem, but the approach it took was like using Postgres schemas, which are almost separate databases inside of a database, if that makes any sense. Recursion So row level tenancy, on the other hand, is a lot more scalable or whatever. So you don't have to be creating sort of these separate databases for every single customer you have. And so we've been using Acts As Tenant, and I offered to help out and maintain that gem. And the author, I emailed him, I guess, back in September. It looked like the beginning of September, and forgot that I even emailed him because last week Andrew mentioned, you can find the email address in like the gem spec usually. So I sent him another email after I realized I had before and was like, hey, just want to follow up here in case you missed it. And Irwin M is his username on GitHub. He responded and gave me access to GitHub and Ruby gems. And I merged in like basically all of the PRs and everything, except for there's one kind of requested feature and a couple PRs for supporting multiple tenants on models, which I think I'm going to consider, but it also might have to be like more of a major version release. But that's been really interesting to maintain. First of all, it's an old project. So there's like, I forget what the oldest commit or something that I had seen, but stuff was like 10 years old kind of commits and code in there. So I went and refactored the whole RSpec test suite. And one thing that was interesting in there was that if you call these methods in your controller, they actually class eval inside of that method to go apply and add other methods to the controller, which I didn't really love because that was like an obvious thing where why don't you just use a module? So I refactored that and made them just regular old ActiveRecord concerns. And then I moved the current tenant helper, because if you have a controller method and you want it available in your views, you do helper method. But I just did the opposite. Just move that into a view helper module and then include that in your controller and you're done. So it was fun to clean up that gem and just make it more well-rounded and whatever. I also added the appraisal gem so that you can test the gem against Rails 5.2, 6.0, and Rails Master. So we should be much more ready for any new versions of Rails and can add those in for testing easier. And I think I also, for the first time, did the GitHub Actions CI with the Matrix version so we can run it against Ruby 2.6, 2.7, 3, or whatever. And it was fun. It was like a lot of work, but I like really cleaned house, and Irwin emailed me back and he was like, it feels like someone's gone in your garage and cleaned it all out for you. And you feel a little bit embarrassed about the mess that you had. And I was like, that's hilarious.
This is cool. I've been just sitting here while you were telling the story, like going through all the issues and the pull requests that you've closed. And
yeah,
I linked to the issue where you kind of took it over. Like this is really cool to see. It's like kind of like a theme of like things that we really love and rely on, like Railscasts kind of going dark, and then something else like reviving it. And this is just another example of that. It's cool.
Yeah, it was fun because, the thing is like people move on and the projects still exist and they're still needed. And it's hard to transfer ownership of that stuff. You got to trust whoever you're transferring it to and whatever. And I think one of the things that really helped was like, I stood up and was like, hey, we use this in Jumpstart Rails and I'm actively using it. I'd be happy to maintain it. And I do GoRails, so maybe I have some credibility. But really, I think the thing that made it an easy thing to give me ownership was we started a fork and people started making their PRs from Acts As Tenant also to my fork. So I was maintaining it separately. And it would have been fine if he never gave me access. I would have just renamed it and published a new gem, and that would have been okay. But unfortunately, that would leave basically everybody to find that issue and then go find my fork, and it would have been a pain for people. So it was really nice, I think, because I had already basically taken care of a ton of issues. And by the time he saw my email, he was like, wow, okay, I trust you. You've already done a good job and you're already maintaining it. even though you don't have access to the official version. So I think that is a good way if you find an old project that's kind of abandoned that you would like to take over, just go do it and then get in touch with the maintainer, because it builds up so much trust because they can see that you're already doing a good job. And that makes it way easier for them to say, yeah, sure, you can have, access to the repo. So yeah, it was a fun thing. And I should also mention that I did a screencast on some of the updates for Acts As Tenant on GoRails. So if you're curious about some of that process, I walked through cleaning up the RSpec test suite and trying to simplify it, because I found tests that were like a block that didn't have an assertion in it. And I was like, well, that's not technically, it's testing something, but it's not actually going to raise a failure. So like they had a lot of little things to fix there. And I walked through some of that, refactoring the controller stuff into concerns and modules and whatever. And it was kind of fun to be able to like do all that and then document it and share the process, because it took a lot of hours that I could not put into a live stream very easily. But, kind of went over it as an overview in the screencast, which I thought was kind of fun to do. I'd like to do more of that.
So are you using your fork in Jumpstart?
Yes.
So are you going to move back?
Yep, already did.
Cool.
Yep, I did. I made a new release of Acts As Tenant version 0.5. And as I say that right now, it's like a 10-year-old gem. I think it's about time for a version 1.0. So I think that I may just make that bump right now or shortly.
Right this second.
Yeah, it's been 10 years or something. There's the MIT license file here 9 years ago. So yeah, it is somewhere around that old. It's pretty funny. But
it's really,
you don't want these.
That's a cool story. Like,
yeah, and I would like to encourage anybody to either do the same or message me or whoever. And, if there's an old project that's loved and still used and needs maintainership, we need to throw in and start putting some effort into keeping these things alive. Devise was a good one that it's so popular. Luckily, somebody took that over kind of right away when Platformatech, when they stopped maintaining it. That one kind of took over seamlessly, which is nice, but not all of them get that. So I feel like we need to, you can go email me or the GoRails forums or something or tweet at me, if you find a project that needs to still get updated and just kept up to date. Like you're using HasFriendship. It appears as it's still maintained. Last commit was in January. It's not like that is a feature that's going to change regularly. Right. So I would say that one's still solid, but there's lots of them out there that need it too, or whatever. So that was a very busy 2 weeks. I feel like that was a lot of work to go do that. But now that it's solid, I don't think I'm going to have to do hardly anything to it going forward. And I think maybe, if anything, if there are ActiveRecord changes, maybe we have to do a little bit to tailor to those in the future, but there shouldn't be hardly any changes or much maintenance work to do on it. And honestly, some of the best stuff to do is just get the GitHub Actions and appraisal going so that you're testing against all the Ruby versions and the upcoming one, and same with your Rails versions, and just make sure or that other people know when it doesn't work and it needs a little bit of tweaking for the latest versions. So
I didn't have this to talk about, but did I tell you I built a card game this weekend in Rails?
No.
I went kind of stir crazy. Maybe it's 2 weekends ago. This last weekend, I went stir crazy because I couldn't leave any rooms because of COVID.
Yeah, right.
So I found out the entire deck of cards and Cards Against Humanity is a Creative Commons license. And as long as you're not wanting to make money off of it, you can just use it forever you want.
They're a surprisingly cool company, for stuff like that. That is awesome.
So yeah, Cards Against Humanity was the game I was playing when I got COVID.
So it's only fitting.
Yeah. So I downloaded a JSON file of 31,000 cards and I built a Rails app just in a day using just cable ready so I could have like a real time game with my friends. And so that night, like 5 of us just hopped on Zoom and we just played Cards Against Humanity in the browser.
Your COVID free version.
Yeah. It was a ton of fun.
Didn't you make a card game as a test of Stimulus Reflex or something back in the day?
Yeah. When I wanted to learn Reflex, I built a blackjack game.
That's right. Yeah. This is your thing. Just digitizing all the card games slowly.
Yeah. And it's super terrible code that I'm writing. Doesn't matter, right? Like I'm just trying to do it to have fun. And it was really satisfying to like sit around with my friends and play something that like I had kind of built.
Yeah, right. And you're the user of it with friends who are like going to use it different ways than you do. So they're going to probably find little edge cases or whatever that you didn't. And you're kind of like doing a trial by fire of it. But that's like where you really learn a lot, which is awesome. I love doing that.
Yeah, it was cool. It was really satisfying. I had it set up to where, it rotates whichever player is like reading the card and they don't play that round. And then what happens is like every time somebody would select a card out of their little hand, it would just throw it onto the DOM for everyone using cable ready. So like you knew how many cards, and they're all like face down and like they were all Vue components. So like literally it just took like each card component knew if it should be showing itself or not. And so like if everybody's still playing, then they were all face down. And then whoever's selecting like clicked a button to like reveal all the cards. So it would update everyone's browser to have all the cards shown. You wouldn't know who played it. And then when they selected it, that selected one would turn green for everyone. And then the next person in line would have a button that's like start next hand.
Oh, that's kind of awesome. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And with cable ready, I can imagine that being surprisingly easy to do, to broadcast those updates for everybody. That is really cool.
Yeah, especially using Vue components, right? Because we just make each card a component. And so all I have to do is just render it out with cable ready as the HTML I'm passing over, just like render to string this component.
That's awesome. That is really cool. Yeah, I did a little bit of that as we're working on like a version 2 of HatchBox, just broadcasting the status changes to servers and apps and whatever. And it is wonderful how simple that is to just say, let's render this little div and send that over to everybody who's on this page looking at this thing. It is super satisfying to do that. And I'm not using Vue Component for it, but I should, because one of the examples that I ran into was if you're in a model and say the state changes of an object and you want to broadcast something, then you've got to like write a helper or something and then, include that in your model so that cable ready can broadcast that. But then if you're like doing a content tag to generate like a span, like I was doing a little badge, then I got to include my helper, the content tag helper, cable ready, and do all of that inside of my model. And I'm like, no, obviously this is much better if we just throw it in, a Vue component and let it do the rendering and just trigger that. That way my model is go render this component. Don't worry about these tags and helpers and whatever other nonsense. It was like very quickly getting out of hand because the first version was like, yep, just go pipe this stuff over. Just a string. Don't worry about it. Not a big deal. You need DOM IDs. That's it. And then the second, more complicated status tags are like, well, we might want an SVG in here. And all of a sudden I was like including 4 Vue helper modules in my model. And I'm like, yep, getting out of hand. So yeah, I'm going to probably go and refactor with Vue Component there because I think that would make it perfect and nice and concise and organized.
Yeah, I love it.
I was just thinking, I wonder if there's a way to do like a method on your, you do your Vue Component render, but you could do like a render and broadcast method on your component that would render and then trigger the broadcast so that, for example, in my model, I wouldn't have the cable ready broadcast code. I would just say, take this component and render and broadcast it out. That'd be kind of nice.
That'd be really cool.
I have to do that.
You're always the example I think about when I use Cable Ready, like HatchBox. You're just updating changes from out of nowhere all day, and you need to broadcast it no matter where you are.
Yeah.
You need a notification.
Yeah, that's the tricky part about that is you don't know. Honestly, the trickiest part has been it's hilarious, but it's also, more complicated than it sounds like your friendships. If you click deploy on an app, I don't go and create a log record immediately. I create a job, which creates the log, which then runs the script that does all that. And it takes a second where your controller is processing and it's like, kick off this job. And then it's got to render the view. And then your browser's got to actually load that and everything. So there's been so many times where I will do that. Sidekick is way too fast and starts running the job and has updated the status of the app. And then the browser's like, yeah, the app is not deploying yet. And you're like, well, but it is because Sidekick's stupid fast. So there's so many of those little things where, the easy shortcut is like, we'll queue up this job for a half a second from now, which should be enough time for, the browser and whatever to load. But yeah, those little nuances that make some of that stuff ends up being super complicated. And I really don't want to have to set the status beforehand, or I don't want the delay of the 1 second before the job starts. That's unnecessary. But the HTML response and everything is like slower than that. So there's like definitely workarounds that you can end up doing, but some of them are messier than others.
Yeah. That is very fascinating. I hadn't even thought about that. I just thought about all the things I have in the background. One thing I did it's for this Stimulus Reflex course, which is becoming a cable ready course, but that's another subject. Since I was using Bootstrap and their wonderful Toast library, I don't think I even used a mutation observer. I may have just used jQuery. I don't remember. Oh no. Okay. So what I did was I made Toast that are broadcast from Cable Ready. And what it does is I connect. So it's written like each toast is a Vue component. Mm-hmm. And so what I do is I just like, if I need to fire off a toast with Cable Ready, I insert adjacent HTML, throw this Vue component in an alerts div. And then each alert has a stimulus controller it connects to. And on connect, it fires the toast.show method. So what happens is I can send like 50 toasts and they just stack on top of each other because they're coming in real time. And then they're using Stimulus to wire themselves up to Bootstrap's toast functionality.
Yeah. Oh, that's so slick. I love it.
It just felt so good, right? I didn't need a bunch of raw JavaScript. I actually only wrote one line of JavaScript. The connect method literally just took this dot element and called .toast show on it. So yeah, right. It felt slick.
The hacky thing that you might default to would be like, we'll use Cable Ready to insert this, and then we'll also use Cable Ready to run a line of JavaScript, like eval it to run the toast. But you don't want to be doing that. That's like server, the js.erb or the old RJS, responses. That's not great. And it also doesn't work for toast that might already be on the page or something on page load. So if you're doing a notice or an alert and you want those to show up as toasts, you're going to need something anyways that happens on page load. So if you put it in the stimulus controller, both those things work with no difference in code. And you get that kind of for free, which is sweet.
Yeah. If I have someone load, I can just literally loop through them on page load in an ERB template, render Vue component for each one of them, and they'll automatically just wire themselves up. If one comes in after it's loaded, it's still showing, it just puts it on the bottom of the list.
I love it.
A lot of that is because of Bootstrap magic. Their JavaScript,
yeah,
API
it's smart enough to not lay them on top of each other and whatever.
Right.
Yeah, because I built... Speaking of Bootstrap, I built the Tailwind Stimulus Components library, and I just merged Julian Rubish. I just made a PR for the slide over component from the side, which is awesome. So shout out to him. But yeah, I originally was building that to basically replicate tabs and all those features from Bootstrap into Tailwind using Stimulus. And like you were saying, the toast does a lot behind the scenes that you don't know about. You just say toast.show and you're done. The modals are another example of that are like, guess what? If you want a modal, you can add a backdrop. But if you do that, the background's still scrollable. So you got to go to the body and you got to add overflow, hidden, or something in order to stop the background from being scrollable. But then if you do that, then you make the page so it's not long anymore. It actually stops where the browser stops, which means the scroll bar disappears. And then you've got to add fake padding in that's equal to the width of the scroll bar, which is different on different operating systems and different browsers. So you have to calculate dynamically a like padding right on the body to insert temporarily while the modal's open. And I ended up like reading through all the Bootstrap modal JavaScripts for that. And there's a lot more than you think to building a modal that's actually like nice and compatible with everything. So yeah, the Bootstrap code is fantastic. Unfortunately, like the headless UI stuff from Tailwind looks fantastic. I just wish there was like a Stimulus version of it all. So,
yeah, I'm slowly starting to accept that when they release the Alpine version, that I may just start using Alpine with Stimulus. Like it's not, my ideal world is not having to have a bunch of libraries like that, but the amount of time I could save by having someone else who is actually probably more knowledgeable about the DOM and accessibility, stuff like that, than I am. They're spending all their time building these headless UI things for Alpine. I'm probably just going to want to use that.
Yep. That's exactly what I did when I rewrote GoRails' UI in Tailwind, because I came from a Bootstrap theme that I was using for years. And yeah, Tailwind UI is awesome, but a lot of those things require JavaScript. And so luckily I got it before they removed the Alpine examples. So it was a lot easier to copy paste those in. And yeah, I use Alpine for all of those features and then Stimulus for everything I wrote. And it works great. So they don't really conflict or anything, which you do get if you do, for example, jQuery or Stimulus and Vue together. They can't intermix anywhere. And that was a problem I ran into where I had a modal from Bootstrap that I tried inside of a Vue component on HatchBox one time. And it just gets rid of the click event that was already there from Bootstrap whenever Vue loads, which makes sense. But yeah, like Stimulus and Alpine are, I think, very compatible, very easy to use. And that's what I would do. So maybe eventually someone will, go through and make Stimulus components for all those. But they're not as simple as you think, especially if you're trying to get the transitions, which is what Julian was adding for dropdowns, I think. And then he kind of used that to power the slide over functionality. And animations are not great, but he was saying the Stimulus version 2 stuff, which will have the class and values API, would really clean this stuff up. But until we have a final version of that, we're not going to put too much effort into making it perfect in Stimulus 1 until we don't want to have to redo all that work.
Yeah, they have a free version of Tailwind UI. It's just like a handful of components from...
Oh, okay.
So that's actually what Laravel uses for their new auth screens, is the free components from Tailwind UI.
Oh, that's neat.
So I was like, okay, well, that's cool. I'm going to go build Stimulus components to match up with all these. And I got like halfway through one of them and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing.
It's harder than it looks.
It's so difficult, because I was like, I'm just going to write Stimulus controllers just for these free components so I can use them. I think at the time I was trying to use it for my course, and it was like a rabbit hole, because I found somebody wrote like this ES6 package that will give you those kind of animation start, animation end, like those transition
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what the name of them are, but essentially you can change classes during animations. And even using that, there were still so many gotchas. And I was like, you know what? I left it alone. I mean, I didn't even officially be like, I'm done with this. I just stopped working on it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not fun. And I looked into it briefly and I was like, I don't have time for this. And I didn't even start because I wanted to add transitions and whatever to the modals and have nice little animations as they open. It's not worth my time right now.
Yeah, we just need that Alpine version. We can just roll with that. I'll be happy with that.
That'll be good. Yeah, there's been a couple things lately that have been absolutely going down the rabbit hole. One of those being Tailwind CSS 2.0 came out. Was that Wednesday? So
like new website.
Yeah, it looks really nice. So of course, we're all excited to go upgrade Jumpstart Pro to use it. And we start going down that rabbit hole. And there's a post CSS 7 compatibility version, but we were trying to use the regular one, which uses post CSS 8. Because if you go to Rails Webpacker repo, there's been updated to use post CSS 8. So presumably that's simple, right? But of course, Webpack dev servers, it's not deprecated, but the command from the Webpack dev server module does not exist anymore. You actually use Webpack serve instead. So you still have to install the package, but you have to run a command from Webpack instead. So it's like adding a feature to Webpack instead of being its own separate thing, I guess, which makes sense. But of course, the Rails master for Webpacker is updating the JavaScript packages, but the bin Webpack dev server bin stub in Ruby doesn't use the right command and hasn't been updated. So we're working on this till 11:30 at night on Wednesday night, trying to get Tailwind CSS 2.0 working and also keep, we can get it working, but we can't get the Webpack dev server working. So I end up forking the gem and making a PR because I changed the command in that work. And it was just one of those rabbit holes where I'm like, oh boy. So another one we had this week was Acts As Tenant using GitHub CI for the Matrix version where we can run the whole test suite against Ruby 2.6, Ruby 2.7, 3.0. Ran into the same thing where we're using appraisal so we're, running multiple Ruby versions, but each of those Ruby versions runs multiple Rails versions. So it's just, branching into more and more things. And the cache, one of the guys noticed in the issues or made a PR that the gem cache is the same, but we are using different Ruby versions. So we don't want to actually share that between them. So he made a PR, of course, to fix that so that they're namespaced and they have the Ruby version in the cache folder name. But of course, then that raises an issue with appraisal is wrapping bundler and it'll pass in the right gem file. So you have a Rails 5, Rails 6, and a Rails master gem file. So it passes in that as an environment variable automatically for you, which is nice. However, bundler, and I'm not sure why, but bundler, well, I guess this makes sense, right? So if you run bundle, it's got its own environment in your terminal or whatever. But then when bundler loads, it needs to change some environment stuff so that you install gems in the correct directory and whatever. In deployments and whatever, it's now bundler says to use bundle config path instead of -path in your bundle line, your bundle install line, because you could forget it. So they encourage you now to use the command to change the config. But then appraisal doesn't know about that because it clears out all of the options and tries to reset the bundle environment. And you end up triggering use bundle to trigger appraisal, and then appraisal triggers bundle to run bundle install. And so it's like this crazy thing.
That is the definition of rabbit hole. That is not just casual use of that term.
Yep. And so this has been bugging me for a day or two. And I'm poking at it for a few hours at a time, and I'll go sleep and then check it in the morning and see if I thought of any other things. Because I don't really know all of the the Ruby opt environment variables and stuff that it manages. Like I'm not very familiar with those because I don't generally have to use them for anything. But I think today I finally made a PR that fixes it. And we've used it in the Rails bytes examples, like when you trigger bundle install from a Rails generator command, you have to run bundle with unbundled env, which will temporarily reset all the environment variables for a block and then set them back. And that allows you to run bundle from inside of a thing that bundle is running. And I was able to go and patch appraisal to go use that same thing, and it seems to work. So it has been like 2 weeks of rabbit holes. I feel like we fixed Webpacker, fixing Acts As Tenant, fixing appraisal. I also somehow in there got time to finally merge a PR for paddle support into pay. So that was another thing that is now in master. I probably need to cut a release for that, but Paddle's API doesn't allow you to create charges as one-off things. You require a subscription, and they have no API endpoints to actually ask for a customer object and stuff. You have to like mostly redirect to their website. So I'm really looking forward to, Thanksgiving break or something, because I've been in the weeds for like 2 weeks now on just random open source stuff, no work stuff really. I'm trying to like make screencasts and document some of these things because I know they're probably good to learn from. But yeah, oh boy, it has been a week.
Wow. Yeah. I've been thinking about either making another repo under the pay namespace or just working on pay to make it just like stupid simple to like sync up with Stripe checkout, because Stripe checkout has been a dream come true for me in my side projects.
I haven't used that yet, but that's the one that works similar to Paddle where you redirect to there, because it's not is it the same thing they call this? What's the button?
Oh no, that is different. I don't remember what the name is, but yes,
okay.
What it does is you create, the way I have it set up with Rails, I know we're almost out of time, but the way I have it set up is when you click a link, takes you to a Rails controller action, sends a request to the Stripe API to like essentially create this checkout session, and then you do a Rails redirect to the URL they give you. So when you click the button, hits Rails, it knows it's your server, so it authenticates the requests, redirects them. And then the other thing you give it is like, where should we go back on success and where should we go back on failure? And so I actually have it set up to always hit the same endpoint, whether it's successful or fails. But I give it a param, and if it's like param success, it throws confetti and stuff, right? And then billing, so that's for like the checkout. Then update, like managing their account is similar. You like hit the server, authenticate this thing, and then you go to the billing portal and do your stuff.
Nice. Yeah. So you don't have to manage hardly anything inside of your app anymore. Updating a payment method, you just redirect them there and everything is basically in there, right?
And so what I do is for HopeGrid, I took out card information. Like I just took out all those fields I was storing in the database. And I have a subscription model now. And all it is the organization's ID and JSON-B of all the Stripe data for the subscription. So literally, my organization model, my subscription model, if I want to know, is it active? I just have a method that just looks in the JSON-B column for Stripe data. It's just like subscribe, yes. So the webhooks are stupid simple because all I'm listening for is, did a subscription update or cancel? Okay, I'll just take your entire subscription blob and store it in the database. Like that's all I care about.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Interesting. Yeah, because in the Paddle stuff, we have to store those URLs for like, they generate a return and cancel URL for a subscription. So we have this now. This is one of the hard things that I did this week, which I probably should turn into a screencast, but I updated and added a JSON column to to support that. So each integration can store arbitrary stuff. But the trick is, and I did this with Noticed, but I want to make it SQLite, MySQL, and Postgres compatible. But ideally, I'm using the JSON and JSONB columns. So in Postgres, it's JSONB, in MySQL, it's JSON, and in SQLite, it's a text column serialized. And I actually went through and built a dummy app for Pay that actually has full integrations for Braintree, charges and subscriptions, Stripe, and they're all in the Bootstrap nav bar. So you can go play with that in the test dummy app, which is kind of cool. But then I wrote the GitHub actions for Pay to actually run 3 separate actions, 3 test suites that does SQLite, MySQL, and Postgres.
Oh, wow.
It creates the test database separate for each one in whatever database we're testing. And then it will run the full test suite against each one. So we can know that it will work against all 3 of those. And then you can go do the other things that I was doing before with Ruby and appraisal. So now you can test against each Ruby version, say 3 Ruby versions. Each one of those tests against 3 Rails versions. And then each one of those tests against 3 different databases.
Jeez.
So,
hey, at least you're confident when you deploy a change.
Yeah, you know that it's never going to break anybody's stuff, which will be like super fascinating. Yeah, that was another rabbit hole because I was trying to figure out, can I use an environment variable locally to change like the database URL or something and, run my test suite locally, kind of like appraisal does, but it wasn't worth the effort. So I just let, GitHub Actions do it. And then locally, if I want to do it, I just pass in a database URL in my test suite. And I can run a rake task, right? Like that just loops the test suite 3 times or whatever for different environment variables. Because originally I tried using the multi-database support to connect to different databases. And I was actually having a really hard time having 3 different development or test databases. And I ended up saying, screw it, I'll just pass in the database URL to override whatever's in the database YAML. So it's been a whole thing this week, but I really went deep in the weeds. But I also learned a bunch of good stuff that I'm like, this would be cool screencast to cover and show,
Totally. I think that's a really cool thing that like you're testing all the different, like the 3 popular database. Like It sounds so funny. Like I'm looping through.
Yeah, it's like everything gets infinitely more complex each time because you're like, it's the latest 3 Ruby versions. Oh yeah, crap, we're going to need the latest 3 Rails versions for each of those Ruby versions. And then 3 databases for each of those. And yeah, it's like factorials, man.
It sounds so crazy, but it's so genius. We're hella out of time, but
yeah, well, we should wrap up there. But yeah, I'm gonna plan on making some screencasts out of those things because I sure learned a lot doing that, and that was what helped me feel like I should follow through and figure it out rather than just give up halfway through. Because I was like, well, at least I can make a screencast on this, and it'll be helpful for other people. So,
oh, that's so good. Well, this was a lot of fun. I feel like this was a lot of really good stuff today.
Yeah, it was. There was a lot of random but good things. So, well, I guess we'll talk to you. Well, I don't know about next week because that is Thanksgiving and Black Friday. So maybe we'll record an early episode or something. But
if not, I'll catch up with you afterwards.
Yeah, sounds good.
See ya.